Abu Hamid Muhammad ibn Ahmed At-Tusi al-Ghazali al-Ash'ari was one of the prominent and influential Islamic philosophers who lived in the Islamic Golden Age. Abu Hamid al-Ghazali was born in Tusi, now known as Mashhad in Iran. Some of the cities that he studied: first one, Tusi, his hometown, Jurjan, and Nisabur. Some of his famous teachers: Imam al-Radakani, Imam Abu Nasr Ismail, Imam al-Juwayni. In 1091, Imam al-Ghazali was appointed to be a professor in Baghdad to teach Islamic studies such as fiqh, hadith, and Quran. In 1095, he faced a spiritual crisis and he left to be a professor. He distributed all of his wealth because he saw what he's doing was only worldly things, not for akhirah. After that, he went to Syria and stayed there 2 years. And after 2 years, he went to do Hajj and Umrah. In 1099, Imam al-Ghazali went back to his hometown where he started to become a murshid, but this time not as a professor. He stayed there until he died in December 18, 111. Some of his famous books: the first one, منقذ من الضلال, تهافت الفلاسفة, إحياء علوم الدين.
On one of his trips, Al-Ghazali met a group of thugs. The thugs took everything was with him. Al-Ghazali followed the group of the thugs. Then the leaders of the group turned to Al-Ghazali and said, "Go back or else you will die." Al-Ghazali asked the leader to just return back to him his book because nothing to do with it. Then the leader of the group said to Al-Ghazali, "What do you want to do with the books?" Al-Ghazali said, "It has my knowledge." The leader of the group, he said, "How do you claim that you have the knowledge and we took the knowledge from you, so you remained without knowledge?" After that, the leader of the thugs tell his friend to return the books to Al-Ghazali. Al-Ghazali said this was a God-given interrogator. Al-Ghazali said, "I returned back to my home and I started to memorize all the books." He spent 3 years just to memorize and study his book. So now if he wanted to travel, no one will take his knowledge from him.
After getting his great knowledge, Al-Ghazali knew it was his duty to deliver. So he decided to write books to deliver what he learned to everyone. Through his journey, he authored over 70 books about science, Islamic reasoning, and Sufism. One of the most famous books written by Al-Ghazali, and one of his earliest books, was Disciplining the Soul. The spiritual life in Islam begins with Riyadat al-Nafs, the inner warfare against ego, distracted and polluted by the worldliness. The lower self has a tendency to drag the human creature down into arrogance and vice. Only with a great effort of will, a sincere worshipper can achieve the purity of a soul, which enables him to attain God's proximity. A second great example of Al-Ghazali books was Eternity of the World. The main focus of that book, Al-Ghazali wanted to respond to the Aristotelian approach, which simply about motion can create always a motion. In other words, force will always create another force. And therefore, for a force to be created, another force must act upon on that force. The only goal of the Aristotelian approach was to prove that time stretches in the future and the past, which proves that God did not create the world in a certain point of time. Al-Ghazali responded with two arguments. The first one was that the world that we know today, created with a certain boundaries, we won't need the time before the creation of the world by the God. A second argument was we can only imagine the time before the creation of the world by God. And our imagination is a fictional thing, as well as our thoughts about the time before the creation of the world. That proves that God in the first place didn't want humans to understand the time before the creation.
The third book that is considered the famous and important book had written by Ghazali is Revival of the Religious Science, called in Arabic Ihya Ulum al-Din. In this book, Al-Ghazali elaborated lots of things and divided the book into 4 parts. The first part, Al-Ghazali was talking about the customs and how customs affect the religious and the people life in the bad side. And the second part or second quarter, Al-Ghazali was talking about the religious science and how we connect the religious with science and help people to understand the religious at the good way. The third part or the third quarter, Al-Ghazali was talking about the destruction, things that distract people from the right path and distract them from the way of the God. So he elaborates lots of things there and he recommends and put some solutions. The fourth part, Al-Ghazali was talking about the rescuers or the savers, the things that every human being must do it to save himself from the harmful in this life and the hereafter. Fourth book, Al-Ghazali, he created or he authored that the incoherence of the philosophers. And this book considered as a distinguished book that had written by Al-Ghazali, because in this book Al-Ghazali explained and elaborate about the philosophers and their thinking and their way to understand things. But he was emphasized more about the Muslim philosophers, that they are following the great philosophers, and he specifically was talking about 2 philosophers of the Islamic scientists. One of them is Ibn Sina and the second one Al-Farabi. And the main issue and problem that he was talking about, the first one about how God knows things, and he talking about this issue and he elaborate and explain it by the right way. The second one is about the emanation, and that issue the Muslim philosophers brought it from the Greek philosophers, and also he explained it by the right and good way and elaborate the issues and the problem, not in by the religious side, but he elaborated as a logical or rational side. And that is it. Thank you.
700 years ago, in December 1111, the world bid a sad farewell to one of the most influential contemporaries, Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. That same world still has a reason to be nostalgic. His work shaped how Muslim generation would understand their religion, and even influenced the European theologians such as Thomas Aquinas. His life was one of fame, doubt, confusion, and introspection and searching. His journey was riddled with many eternal questions and meaning which still face us today. Al-Ghazali's major contribution lies in philosophy, religion, and Sufism. In philosophy, Al-Ghazali upheld the approach of mathematics and exact sciences as essentially correct. In contrast to some of the Muslim philosophers such as Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina, he portrayed the inability of reason to comprehend the absolute and infinite, and most importantly, to diminish the negative influence of Aristotelianism and excessive rationalism. In religion, particularly mysticism, he cleansed the approach of Sufism from its excesses, and he stressed on the importance of genuine Sufism. What he maintained was the right path in order to attain the absolute truth. Al-Ghazali's influence was deep and everlasting, and in order to describe his whole life, Armstrong draws an analogy with the end of a great musical beat. There is a profound beat of pregnant silence before the applause erupts. Perhaps contentment is this serene, yet weighty moment of realization that we have transcended our own understanding and submitted to what has been found. Al-Ghazali tried to live in this beat of silence,